Namaste and welcome back to the JavaScript series. My dear friends, today we are going to learn an extremely important concept in JavaScript which is called as functions as first-class citizens or functions as objects. Now I know these words can be very overwhelming for you, but don't worry, I will simplify it down to a level where anybody can understand. First and foremost, if you've been following this series closely, you know that previously I've discussed about what is an object in JavaScript, right? So in JavaScript, an object essentially looks like this. It's key value pairs or property value pairs. You can call it as key value or property value pairs, right? Now please try to understand, a JavaScript object in JavaScript is called as a first-class citizen. It has a first-class citizen status. Now please try to understand, in order for any value in JavaScript, it could be a number, it could be a string, it could be a single character, or it can even be an object. If any of the values in JavaScript need to get the status of a first-class citizen, there are three things that it should be able to do. What are those three things? First and foremost, I should be able to store this within a variable. Second thing is, I should be able to pass it as an argument to functions. Third thing is, I should be able to return it from a function back as a returned value. If it has all these three things with it, it can now get the status of a first-class citizen. In fact, it is treated as a first-class citizen. Now, what is a first-class citizen? What does that even mean? I will show it to you, but first of all, let me see whether an object actually satisfies these three things, right? Now, how do we check that? For that, let me just bring up my editor for you. Quickly here, I'll just go and I'll create one object for you. And this is the syntax of an object, right? Inside this, let's assume I want to create a car object. I'll just say that the name of the is a BMW. Next, I will say the cost of the car is around 75.6. And next thing I'm going to say is probably the mileage that it offers is around 8.9, like this. Am I clear? Now, this is an object. This is a syntax of an object. Now, if the first thing is, if it should be a first-class citizen, I should be able to store this within a variable. I'll call it as let c1. As you can see clearly, I can store it inside a variable, which means the first condition is satisfied. Am I clear? Now, if in case I were to just go here and say console log and I were to just print c1, and if I were to execute it for your reference, if I were to execute it for your reference, node exmp.js, clearly you can see an object is nothing but property value pairs like this. Correct or not? Great. But this is not enough to become a first-class citizen. To become a first-class citizen, I should be able to pass this as an argument or input to a function. Let's explore that, okay? So what I'm going to do here is, instead of printing this guy, I'll just go here and on top of this, let us assume I create one function like this. I'll call this function as maybe exmp, just an example function. Now please try to understand, this function is going to now get a car object as input. It is going to get a car object as input. Sir, can I really pass an object as input to a function, sir? Certainly. I will now go here and I will just call this as car. It's just a variable. I can call it whatever I want. I'm just calling it as car. Now, inside this, what I will do is, I will just go and say console.log and I will print this object car. Am I clear till here? Now, my aim is to take this car object c1 and pass it as input to this function exmp, and it should be able to collect it. Oh really? How are you going to do that? Watch this carefully. I'll just come here. I'll call this function exmp, but I will not leave it empty. I have to pass an input. And what is the input you will be passing? C1. Understood what I'm trying to say? Now, this particular code, if it has to make sense, then you must and should have attended the pass by value and the pass by reference lecture which I have uploaded onto the channel. I hope you have gone and watched it. If you have not, I highly recommend you to watch it before continuing with the explanation here. But for those of you who have already watched it, I'm going to now explain it from the memory point of view. Everybody knows that when a JavaScript program is going to execute, there are two memory segments which is immediately created within our RAM. One is your stack, another is your heap. The first thing that happens within every JavaScript program is that there is a region created within the stack called as the global execution context, which we in short always call as GEC. Now within the global execution context, there are two phases, the creation phase and the execution phase. Now those of you who have attended the hoisting lecture know that in the creation phase, hoisting happens first. Then the variable and function declarations happen second. I am not showing all that hoisting part because I hope you have already understood it. Directly I am coming to the point. When you create an object like this, assignment in programming always means first the right hand side should execute, only then the left hand side. When I come to the right hand side, JavaScript notices open bracket, close bracket, semicolon, which means immediately it understands that you're trying to create an object because this is the syntax of an object literal notation in JavaScript. The moment you do that, JavaScript goes to the heap and creates a brand new block of memory which will also have an address, which is nothing but your object. Now inside this, every object will have two parts, properties and behaviors, has and does. Within the properties part, it will see that there are three properties or three has parts, name, cost and mileage. It will allocate name, allocate cost, allocate mileage, and it will fill in BMW 75.6 and 8.9 respectively. Clearly you can see there are no functions within this object and hence this behavior part would be empty. Am I clear? Wonderful. Now object is done, RHS is done. Now what happens in the LHS? In the LHS, you are creating a variable called as C1, or you are assigning this object to a variable called as C1. Now, where does the C1 get created? Everybody knows it gets created within the creation phase, within the global execution context, within the stack. This is where C1 gets created. Understood? Now, what is C1? It is a variable which is being assigned to an object. What does it mean? What it means is, now this is a reference variable. What is a reference variable? A variable which stores the address of an object. And that is why now C1 will be referring to this object. I hope everybody understood what I am trying to say. Yes? And this I have already explained in previous classes. If you have any doubt, please go attend. Right? So now C1 is referring to the object. Now try to understand. This line is over. Now when I come to the next line, I am calling a function called as exmp. Whenever you call a function in JavaScript, a brand new execution context gets pushed into the stack. Right? Now your global execution context pauses and your execution context of exmp starts executing, which means in your program, this part of the code pauses and now it is this part of the code which is going to execute. So who is executing now is this exmp function. Now what is interesting to see is here also there are two phases, execution phase and creation phase. I am not going to go into the depth of it, I have spoken previously, but everybody knows here you are creating a variable called as car. This variable gets declared inside the creation phase. Now the question is, what will be there inside this variable called as car? Whatever you are passing as input or argument to the function only will be inside this variable. And what are you passing as input? C1. Tell me what is there inside C1? 1000. What is 1000? Value 1000 or address 1000? It is address. When address present within one reference variable is passed as input to another reference variable, then the same address goes and sits inside the other variable, which means what is there inside C1? 1000. That same 1000 is what gets passed to car. Which means now there are two variables both having the same address of the same object. Now what happens? Both these variables start referring to the same object. And that is why now within your program, C1 is also referring to the same car object, car within the function is also referring to the same object. And hence now when I say console.log car, it is obviously the same car which gets printed, and hence you will see BMW 75.6 and 8.9, this name value pairs, key value pairs you will see. Understood? And hence the point is, could I pass a function as argument to, could I pass an object as argument to a function? Did I pass it as argument to a function? Yes, which means the second expectation to get the status of a first class citizen is satisfied. Object can be passed as argument to a function. I hope all of you were able to understand this simple point. And now if in case I were to try and just go execute this code for you, you will 100% see the same reflect. See, if I execute, who is printing is this car is what is getting printed, but the output is the same. If you want proof, I'll go down here and after this I'll directly print console dot log, and I will print C1. Now whether I tell C1 or whether I tell car, ultimately it is the same object, and hence you can notice if I go here, clear the screen, and if I were to re-execute, both C1 and car are actually referring to the same object. Object is the same, references are many. And this is the concept of pass by reference. I hope the two conditions everybody understood. Now what is left out for me to check is the third condition, whether it can be returned as a value from a function. Well, this is also quite interesting, quite easy to see. Watch it. What I will do here is, I'll cut this object and I will paste it inside my function. Now please understand, I've created it inside the function. Now this function will not accept a car object as input. Instead, after the execution, it is going to return this car object C1 as output. Understood? Which means I could pass it as an argument. Now I'm checking whether a function can be returned as a value. Now how will I check that? Very simple. I'll just go here. I will say console.log and I will just call this function called as exmp. Now why am I putting it inside console.log? Because what is exmp returning? This object called as C1. What is this C1? This car object. So if I print the car object, the same property value pair should get printed. Yes? So watch it all of you. If in case I were to go here and if I were to clear the screen and re-execute, 100% it is able to return an object as output as well. Which means the three conditions required for me to categorize an object as a first-class citizen has been satisfied. That is why objects are called as first-class citizens in JavaScript. You can store it in a variable, you can pass it as argument to a function, you can also return it from a function. Am I clear? Now all of this I spoke because I wanted to explain something completely different, which is functions in JavaScript are also first-class citizens, which means functions in JavaScript are also objects. I repeat, functions in JavaScript are objects or they are also first-class citizens. What are you saying, Rohit? An object is a property value pair, name value pair, key value pair. You are saying a function is similar to an object? Yes. You are saying a function also can be stored inside a variable? Yes. Passed as an argument to another function? Yes. Returned as output from another function? Yes, yes, yes. Now this is the most important part of JavaScript which confuses a lot of people. Now let me prove to you why functions are objects in JavaScript. Now let me show you why I'm referring to functions as objects in JavaScript. An object, the general syntax is like this, where you have these name value pairs, key value pairs, whatever. So if function really is an object, then within the function also I should be having these properties and behaviors, these variables and functions, these key value pairs I should have. Now how will I prove that to you? By writing code. So everybody should watch it. If I just go here and if I were to create one function just for me to demonstrate this to you, I'll call it as exmp like this, or let us call it as add. Add is a function which is going to take two inputs. One is A and B. Inside it, it is just going to very simply print the added result of A and B. Very basic function. But the point now is I want to show you that, hey, this is an object. This is actually an object. Understood what I'm trying to say? Now to prove that to you, first of all, let me show you what happens when this code executes. When this code executes, you have your stack, you have your heap. Within the stack, the global execution context is created. Within that, there are two phases. There is the execution phase, there is the creation phase. In the creation phase is where all declarations are taken care of, both function declarations as well as variable declarations. Understood? Now, in this program, I just have a single function. Now, do you want to see how JavaScript looks at this? Try to understand, in JavaScript, functions are an object, and hence the moment you create a function like this, JavaScript goes to the heap and creates a brand new block of memory with an address. I'm assuming it to be 1000, similar to how an object works. It creates a brand new block of memory with an address, and here it will divide it into two parts, properties and behaviors, just like an object. Now what will be there inside the property? Automatically, whenever you create a function, two properties are added. One is called as name, another is called as length. Name property, length property. What will be there inside name, Rohit? What is the name of the function? Add. Add gets stored. What will be there inside length, Rohit? Tell me how many arguments or inputs is the function expecting? 2. If there are 2 arguments, the length will be 2. If there were 5 arguments, length will be 5. If there were no arguments, length would be 0. Understood? Similar to an object, a function has further functions available to it. I repeat, a function has functions available to it or behaviors. One is called as call, another is called as apply, another is called as bind. This is a function object. Now please try to understand, this address has to be given to a reference variable. Which is that reference variable, Rohit? That is only the name called as add. And hence in the creation phase, add gets created. Add gets created. And what will be there inside add? Address of the object 1000, which means add is referring to this. I hope you're able to understand. Functions are also objects only. I know it's something that you need to wrap your head around. But this, if you don't understand, you will really struggle in JavaScript. You'll really struggle in JavaScript. Understood? Any which ways, now to prove this to you, what I will do is, every time I would call a function, this time I'll not call a function. Instead, I'll say console.log, and let us assume I now want to print only the name of the function. How do you access an object using its reference? I will say add. When I say add, I will reach here. Now I want to enter the object. How do you enter the object? Dot operator. Next, name, length, call, apply, bind. What do you want? Name. I will say add dot name. Understood? Okay, can you print the length? All right, I'll do that also. I will just say add dot, I'll call this as length. Now if in case I were to go here, let me clear the previous output out. If I were to execute it, name is add, length is 2. Key value pairs, property value pairs. It is working. Understood? Now, what if I say add dot call? Call function, if I call, it will call the function. You want to see? Watch it. If I just go here now, if I were to say like this, add dot call. But since call is a function, I will put these brackets. And now if in case I were to go clear the screen and execute it, oh, it is saying not a number, that is all right. This part. Okay, if you want to understand this better, I will probably show it to you like this. You can see when I say add.call, again it is, printing these things. What it means by this, later I will explore. Separately, I will teach this call, apply and bind to you. I just wanted to show you that call is there, apply is there, bind is there. Understood? Any which way, the point I want to show you is, see, if I say add.call like this. Now if in case I were to execute, what did you get the output as? This add and 2, right? What is this? I will explain to you later. Don't worry about it at all. Yes? So fine, this much is clear to us, Rohit. So basically the point I'm trying to explore here is that most certainly functions are objects in JavaScript. Functions are objects, which means try to understand. All this I never showed you previously. What did I show you? Boss, you want to call this function, call it like this. Pass it input, maybe 10, 20. If I pass it and if in case I execute it, you got the output as 30. Yes? For this, what would have happened? Its own execution context would have got created. It will have 2 phases. In the creation phase, A and B would have got created. To A, I'm passing 10. To B, I'm passing 20. It gets added, it gets printed, after which this execution context gets removed, and then control comes back here. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying, please understand, in the memory, functions are also objects. Please wrap your head around this, otherwise JavaScript will not make sense. If what I said is true till this point of time, then it means that I can assign a function to a variable, I can pass a function as an argument to another function, And a function can be returned as output from another function. Only then it should be a first class citizen, because function is an object, object is a first class citizen, hence function is also a first class citizen. Yes? Now these three things that I spoke about, does it really apply to JavaScript and functions? Let me show you. Now let us really check whether a function is a first class citizen or not. Watch it all of you. What I'm going to now do here is, I will just go to my code and I will just be creating a simple function. I'll call it as add1, which will be accepting two parameters a and b, and inside this it is going to just print the added result of a added with b, a very simple function, right? Now, just previously I told you functions are objects, which means without complicating it too much, you know that an object is created which will have an address. It will have properties and behaviors. In properties, I'll have name and length. Name is going to be add1, length of the arguments is 2. In the behavior, I'll have call, apply and bind, which we will explore at a later point of time. Okay. Next what happens is, this add1 is nothing but a reference variable, which is going to store the address of the function, and hence this is referring to this. So clearly a function is an object. Now what I will do is, if I were to just go here and say add1, if I were to call add1, and if I were to pass say 10 and 20 like this, and if I were to just go execute my code, yes, 30 came. Now what I want to try is, right, if really a function is an object, then I should be able to give it another reference. I should be able to give it one more reference. It should be possible. So what I will do is, I'll go here and I will say, hey, listen, whatever is there in add1, I want to store it inside another variable called as add2. Now what happens in this case? Please try to understand. Add2 is another variable. Whatever is inside add1, please assign it to add2, I'm saying. Or to make it even more clear to you, I'll just go here and say let add2. I'm just creating a variable called as add2. Now I'm saying whatever is there in add1, give it to add2. What is there in add1? 1000. That 1000 goes and sits inside add2. Now add2 also has 1000. What is 1000? Address. When two variables have the same address, what happens in JavaScript? They start pointing to the same object. Which means now my function object has two references, add1 and add2. It can be accessed using add1 as well. It can be accessed using add2 as well. And if I have to show it to you, watch it. In the next line I will say add2 and I will call it. And here I'll give it some different arguments, 100 and 200. Now if I were to go here and execute it, you can see 30 and 300. But what you must understand is, both are the same function only, which is doing addition for you. So clearly it satisfies the first requirement of being a first class citizen, which is I can store its value inside a variable. Anyways, add1 was a variable. I could store it inside another variable add2. So you can clearly see. This is awesome, right? So please try to understand, in JavaScript a function is an object and hence it can have multiple references. The same function can be accessed and called using different names. If this doesn't sink into the mind, JavaScript becomes very confusing. Okay, awesome, great. Now, can a function be passed as an argument to another function? Now this is another larger story that we are trying to explore, right? Watch this carefully. What I will do here is, I will just remove all of this. I have a function called as add1, okay? Now watch this carefully. I'll just go here, instead of add1, I'll just call it as add. I'm just calling it as add. Next, what I will be doing here is, I will go and create one function which I will call it as, I will call this as exmp, or an example function. Now try to understand, this function exmp is going to be such a function which is going to take another function as input. Yes, you heard me right, it is going to take another function as input. So what I'll do here is, to collect another function as input, I'll create a variable, I'll call it as fun. Understood? Now what happens, Rohit? Now what happens is, inside this, if really what it is collecting is a function, then I should be able to call it. So I will now go here and I will call this function fun. Understood what I'm trying to say? Now, how does this work? Could be another question at the back of your mind. And here, see, I will pass maybe 100 and 200. This code will look extremely confusing for a person who doesn't understand the fundamentals of JavaScript, but let's break it down, okay? Any which ways, here I will now go here and I am going to basically call this function exmp and I am going to pass it add as an input. Don't worry, I will trace the program for you. Try to understand all of you, and everybody should give me your 100% attention if you want to grasp whatever I am saying. Now everybody knows functions are objects in JavaScript, which means try to understand how many functions have you created? You have created 2 functions, which means there should be 2 function objects which are created. This is my first function object, this is my second function object. First function object is exmp, let us assume it has an address 1000. The second function object is my add function, let us assume its address is 2000. Understood? Now inside exmp also 2 parts, properties, behavior. In the properties I will obviously have name as exmp and the length as 1, and obviously in the behavior I'll have the same call, apply, bind, right? Similarly, even in your add function I'll have 2 parts. I'm going to have my properties and behavior. In properties name is add, length is 2, and the same behaviors will be there here as well. Now try to understand what is the name that you gave for this function exmp, which means exmp is the reference variable for this function. This 1000 comes and sits inside exmp. This is referring to this. Understood? Similarly, what is add? Add is a reference variable which you have given for the second function, inside which 2000 comes and sits, which means this is referring to this. I hope you understood what I am trying to say. There are 2 function objects. Now try to understand. Look at this line carefully. If this you understood, you have understood everything. Now I am calling this function called as exmp and I am passing add. What is add? Add is this variable. What is this variable? Reference variable. What does it have? Address of this function. Which means address present in this variable, I am passing it to another variable called as fun. Yes or no? Which means please try to understand this is another variable called as fun. Fun is going to now collect 2000, which means 2000 comes and sits inside fun. And hence now you have 2 variables with the same address, and hence what happens? Both these variables start to point to the same object, and in this case the object is nothing but the add function. And hence please understand, outside the exmp function, this function is referred to as add. Inside the exmp function, the same function is now referred to as fun. Understood what I am trying to say? Now in the next line, please understand, when I call this exmp function, inside it what am I doing? Now I am calling fun. Who is fun? The same add function. I am passing 100 and 200. 100 and 200 gets collected in A and B. Next A and B gets added. I will get 200 plus 100, 300, and that gets printed. I hope you're able to understand. Really, Rohit, is this what is going to happen? Try to understand this carefully. If I go here, clear the screen, re-execute, you saw the answer as 300. Now, directly also I can access this function. Directly how do I access? By calling it as add and passing 100 and 200. Because outside the function, I can access it using add. Inside the function, I can access it using fun, but both fun and add are the same function. And hence, if in case I were to go here, clear the screen and execute it, you got 300 and 300, which means it is the same function which was being accessed. Am I clear till here? Did everybody understand? Which means the entire point here that a function can be passed as input to another function. A function can be passed as input to another function. Understood what I am trying to say? Now, please try to understand, there are some terminologies that they use in JavaScript. This function, which is collecting another function as input, we call this function as a higher order function. What do we call it as? Higher order function. Are we able to understand? The function which is being passed as input to the function, we call it as callback function. What do we call it as? Callback. These are just terminologies. Higher order function, callback function. Higher order function is receiving the function as input, and the function being passed as input, we call it as a callback. And this word callback and higher order functions, I will be using it extensively in the course. So I hope you are registering these terminologies in your mind, and more than registering it, you're understanding it. Am I clear? So I hope this is also clear to you. Obviously, if I can pass a function as an argument, 100% I can also return it as output. I can do that as well. Yes? Now, how are you going to return a function as output? All this I will be showing you when I take up a concept called as closures, which is what separately next I'm going to be teaching you. That's going to be a separate video. But I hope in this particular class you understood that first point, objects in JavaScript are first class citizens, because you can store it in a value, you can pass it as argument, return it. In JavaScript, functions are also objects, which means they are also first class citizens, which means you can store it in a value, you can pass it as argument to another function, and even return it as an output from another function. And to understand this, memory was very important, which I have shown it to you. If you have any doubts, do comment below. And if you really like this content, make sure to like, subscribe and comment. I know I say it in every video, but trust me, it helps the channel a lot. Thank you so much for listening. I'll catch you in the next class. Take care. Bye-bye.